It's Hollywood's biggest night. Which is something we always hear about the Oscars. And I think we should probably, before we talk about the actual films, I want to talk about how the Oscars are starting to change a little bit more, because they're at a weird point in their history. Feels like more and more they're trying to appeal to the mass audience. The ratings are in free fall, more or less. The last 5 years, the ratings have been consistently worse. I think last year was the worst ratings ever. So the question is, why is that important? Well, is it any surprise that the Oscars are trying to introduce a widely derided Best Popular Film category? It shouldn't come as much of a shock that the Oscar ratings have been higher when a more successful mainstream film has a chance of winning, and the ratings have actually been down when it's a more obscure, independent, small film. So for a lot of reasons, the Oscars are kind of facing irrelevancy. Hence why there's so many changes being proposed lately, including better known films, shortening the broadcast by awarding some categories during the break. Could the point even be that in changing Oscar bait films or obvious boring choices for Best Picture, they've resulted in worse ratings and people losing interest in the Oscars? Or it could be the massive influx in broadcasting of other award ceremonies, especially with the Oscars being so late in the calendar year comparatively. They've come under fire in recent years as well for their lack of diversity and not being really socially conscious, something which might have actually impacted this year's nominees as well. Are the Academy looking to overhaul in the hopes of saving ratings? Yes. Perhaps they also hope that they can change the perception of the ceremony and re-establish their dominance as the premier film award ceremony in Hollywood, and not an irrelevant and predictable show full of backslapping and hypocritical scolding. Anyway, I did want to go on a rant about the Oscars, but I think it's pretty important to highlight that the perception of the relevance of the Oscars is at an all-time low. The real question is, how can they turn that around, and how has that affected Best Picture? Because I think overall this year, some of the choices being made are quite surprising. So regardless of those films, I think quite a few have been snubbed, and probably more actually than other years. There might be some films that have been snubbed that are more deserving of a Best Picture nomination, and I've consistently told myself that I'd watch all the Best Picture nominees year in, year out, but this year I actually did it. So I should review a few of them before the ceremony on Sunday. I'm going to discuss them in alphabetical order, and then afterwards I'll rank them. I want to mention a few films off the bat that I thought were definitely worthy of possibly being included, but I have a whole list here. I'm going to hopefully do a video about them during the week. Just a few I think deserved a bit more mention was First Reformed, Paul Schrader's film with Ethan Hawke. I thought that was fantastic. Definitely deserved the Best Actor nominee for Ethan Hawke in my opinion. Eighth Grade, Bo Burnham's film. I thought that film was fantastic. I'll talk about it a bit more on YouTube, but I think nothing else certainly deserved a nod for screenplay. Leave No Trace was another fantastic film. There's a lot of people are pointing out that in a year where we're all about, more female opportunity in filmmaking with regards to directors, that there hasn't really been any acknowledgement of female directors, even though they made some fantastic films this year. But we might address that more on a YouTube video, because there's a lot of films to talk about here and I don't want to get too sidetracked. So starting with our first nominee, one of the more controversial ones, Black Panther, which has 7 nominations. And as I say, I'm going to list the nominations it's got, but obviously all of these have already gotten nominated for Best Picture. So the 7 nominations it's got are Best Original Score, Best Original Song, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, and Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing. So I don't want to say too much about this film, because over the next few months in the lead up to Avengers Endgame, I'm going to review all the Marvel films. But I think this film has really become a point of contention with a lot of people, because the accolades it's got are a bit crazy, maybe a bit over the top. It's the first superhero film ever to be nominated for a Best Picture. The best film ever on Rotten Tomatoes site, even beating The Wizard of Oz and Citizen Kane, which is obviously the Rotten Tomatoes point is flawed and ridiculous. And the Best Picture nomination has only been up to 10 since post 2008, so I think if had it been 10 nominations, The Dark Knight certainly would have got nominated. In fact, one of the reasons they introduced more nominees for Best Picture was because The Dark Knight didn't get nominated. There was such an uproar about that. Anyway, what do I think of Black Panther? I think it's fine, and that's pretty much it. Look, I understand the love for it, I understand the hate for it, but I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. It's not my favourite Marvel film, and I understand, especially for people of colour in America, they have a complex racial history, and for them to have representation and something that embodies a struggle for equality and embraces their past and cultural identity is amazing, Especially to see it done in a comic book film and to have it have been such a success is astounding and inspiring. I've seen a lot of people point out that it's a rare occasion for a film to be nominated for Best Picture with a large African American cast that doesn't revolve around topics of race, slavery or poverty. And instead it celebrates their culture and history, and I do think that's obviously important. On the other hand, I'm not American, and I get a bit less out of it because of that, I think. I like it overall, the performances are really strong, and a lot of nominations I actually agree with. The score for the film is good. He uses standard superhero music with a traditional infusion of African music, and complaints about Marvel scores have been consistent, so I think it's nice to have something like that. The soundtrack by Kendrick Lamar, thought that was fantastic. It stands on its own. I actually thought it was one of the better albums of last year in general. The costume and production design speak for itself. It's stylized and suitable for the tone and aesthetic of the film, without being over the top or distracting from the movie as a whole. It definitely pays a lot of tribute to Afrofuturism, as they're calling it. The sound is great in general. I think the thing about sound, when it's done right, you barely notice it. And with this one, I think it's more noticeable in the fight scenes and in the action beats. It really shines. You can really hear how well the sound is done there. The flaws, on the other hand, are a bit more noticeable in my opinion. Everyone has pointed out, obviously, the special effects in the last act, but I think the last act in general is where the film falls apart a bit for me. As soon as Killmonger comes to power, he doesn't really do much or seem to have much of a plan. Briefly killing off T'Challa is really pointless in the movie. And the big action CGI fight at the end is forced, and yeah, look, it doesn't look great, as we already said. Overall, I don't think it deserves a nomination. I recognise its significance, but I also see its flaws, and I think purely on a discussion on the quality of the film and not its cultural significance or societal importance, I think it falls a little bit short. It's not a bad film, just don't think it should be a Best Picture nominee in my opinion. Which brings us to our next nominee, Black Klansman, which has gotten 6 nominations. Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Film Editing. Spike Lee can be a little bit hit or miss when it comes to filmmaking, but in Black Klansman he finds a film that's tailored to his style, and a strong theme of race that permeates through most of his films. And in the hands of some directors this could be a profoundly mishandled film, but Spike Lee actually handles it with grace. Plays up on the inane absurdity of an African American man infiltrating the KKK and finds the humour in the story, but also manages to get drama out of the story when it demands it. Film has an innate relevance to modern times, with race relations in America being more in the spotlight than they have in previous years, certainly. And the divide between both sides and a rise in all politics is also mirrored to a certain degree in the movie. I think the fact the film manages to play on this while remaining entertaining on its own merits is key to its success. When it comes to watchability of the movie, it's not a stuffy artsy film or a stylish biopic. It stands on its own legs without the political or social context. It's an entertaining film, more so than a lot of the Best Picture nominees this year. You can just watch it, not consider it as something of a massive awards contender, but just more of a mainstream entertaining film. It doesn't feel like as weighty as it should in the hands of another director. The film's well directed. It's obviously one of Lee's best in years. The acting is great. Adam Driver's the only one nominated. I think the whole cast is quite deserving of some accolades. They perform very well, and it's well cast too. I understand the use of the ending. Towards the end of the film it gets a bit heavy-handed though, in my opinion. Its ending, they use real life footage, and I understand its use. I see they need to include it and make it the parallel to real life events is a bit unnecessary, a bit heavy-handed. We understand and we can see that permeating through the film anyway. I don't think the film leading up to this suited that serious tone, because of course it ends on a note of kind of sour realism, and the rest of the film isn't that serious or dark. So I think overall, tonally, the film suffers a bit because of that at the end. It makes that film kind of seem a little bit sloppy towards the finish. I do think the film deserves a nomination for Best Picture overall. I think in a more competitive year though, it might have been squeezed out. It's a strong, socially conscious film that manages to be entertaining but frightening, and to a certain degree those two tonal clashes hurt the film, in my opinion. Moving on to our next nominee, one of the more controversial ones, and that is Bohemian Rhapsody, which has 5 nominations including Best Actor, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing and Best Editing. This is one that people are really, really angry about to a certain degree, and for decent reasons. And for one of them is just the whole Bryan Singer aspect, which is questionable. But even putting that aside, looking at the film for its quality, it's actually something of a shame, because I was gonna bring up a lot of these points, and then as it turns out, this YouTuber Patrick H. Willem, who makes fantastic video essays, talked a bit about musical biopics, and a lot of the points he said actually came up. So I would say you can check that out as well. It's very, very well made video. In general though, this highlights some of the flaws with music biopics, and in my opinion the film embodies a lot of what we think of when we think of bad music biopics. Some people are attacking the film for how it distorts Queen's history in the name of making a formulaic music biopic, and that is absolutely true. The film is very predictable. I don't say that knowing the story of the band all that well, or knowing the intricacies of that. I just think the film is really cliched. It condenses things too much as well. It makes the story quite boring, because they don't really have any challenges. Everything just sort of goes right. Like, how many times in this film is there an issue and the band just does what they want and it works out. It's like Entourage or something, where everything just works out regardless of any issue that comes up. You know, they say something like, "Oh, you don't want to release Bohemian Rhapsody? We'll release it ourselves," and it works out. Or there's not really any conflict in general. They'll say something like, "Oh, this song is missing something," during the recording session, and then someone will tap their foot and they'll be like, "That's it." That eureka moment. It's just ridiculous. It's not any conflict in this movie. Everything just seems to go swimmingly. Everything works out. There's not really any bumps in the road, and when you break it down, that has to make you ask the question of, what's the story of Bohemian Rhapsody? And it's easy to say, oh, it's the story of Queen, but kind of is it. Like, be honest. Do you feel you know anything more about Queen after seeing this film? And then there's the point, like, even if you did, good chance it was that what you learned was inaccurate, as the film jumbles around the timeline in service of a more dramatic but formulaic film. It's not that a biopic needs to be entirely accurate. Dramatization is expected, but here it's done to such an excessive degree, and I don't think you need to know the history of Queen to see that. I think it's very clear watching how fake it is. It just seems too convenient for the way it plays out. So just a few of the inaccuracies: the band didn't break up. Other members had worked as a solo artist before Mercury. Mercury found out he had AIDS long after Live Aid and didn't tell the band until much later. And his relationship with Mary and Jim is quite different in reality. It's just everything in the movie just came too easy for the band, it feels like. There's nothing to get behind. It hits a point when you expect it to hit. All the, popular songs they wrote and that kind of thing, they break up, they get back together. Tragedy and broken hearts and blah, 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 very, very predictable. Queen's story and Freddie Mercury's story is a fascinating one. They're unconventional and unique, but this film gives them such a standard treatment out of laziness, but distorting their history. It just makes for a very uninteresting film. There was a lot of talk beforehand about the band wanting a sanitized version of the story. That's apparently why Sacha Baron Cohen left, as he didn't think it felt like really genuine. And this is what that film feels like. Freddie's sexuality and diagnosis with AIDS is something of an afterthought. And I actually want to remind you of a film that YouTuber Patrick brought up as well, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, because I was thinking about that film a lot recently, and there's a lot of things done in that movie that a lot of these music biopics are guilty of, and it's especially noticeable in Queen. This is Bohemian Rhapsody. It's just a shame because there is a good film in there. He just really didn't give it a good service. It feels like they pushed the brand of Queen more than the actual band. They made it more about promoting their back catalogue and the legacy and making a magical crowd pleaser, but it doesn't make for a good film, in my opinion. Okay, well, what about the positives? I think the music is great. Obviously, it's just the music of Queen, so there's no real surprise there. The mixing and editing is probably well deserved too, as in the sound editing. The final Live Aid sequence is very good. The way they recreated Freddie's voice for the film was fantastically done. I think that deserves some recognition. It was a combination of Rami Malek, I think Freddie's possibly original voice, and an impersonator, so that's very impressive. And it does sound great. The editing is fine. I didn't think it was outstanding or anything. It got a nomination for it. I thought it was a bit obnoxious overall. The best actor nod, I think we should probably talk about this. Rami Malek is a fantastic actor. He's really good in Mr. Robot, and he's really good here as well. I just think his performance has been a bit exaggerated when it comes to how good it is. It is good, but you never, at least for me, and again, all these are personal opinion, I never felt like I was watching Freddie Mercury. It was always just felt like an impression. And I think the best performances, especially in ones based on a real person, you forget you're watching the actor. And I never lost that while watching Bohemian Rhapsody. I know Freddie obviously had quite protruding teeth, but I think in the film, maybe I'm imagining this, it really feels to me like you can hear Rami Malek struggling with the teeth. It really sounds like he's just fumbling around with them a little bit. That's just me. I do think it's worthy of a nod. I just don't think he deserves to win Best Actor, and a lot of people seem to think he does. So there you go. Those are my controversial thoughts on Bohemian Rhapsody. I obviously don't think it deserves a nomination. I think a lot of films that were snubbed are actually more deserving of a nomination. In fact, I probably enjoyed this less than any of the films that I mentioned that I got snubbed. I was actually just genuinely bored with it, and I like Queen. One of the first bands I was into was Queen, and to say that, I mean, it's a real disappointment. It's just very vanilla, cookie cutter film. It's a controversial film, and I apparently have some controversial thoughts on it. I know some people really love this one. It's one of the most successful films nominated in recent memory. Regardless, that brings us to our number 4, our 4th nominated film, which is The Favourite. This is actually tied for the most nominations this year. It's tied with Roma. Has 10 nominations, including Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress by 2, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, and Best Film Editing. So I'm rather kind of ashamed to admit this as a self-titled film buff. I have not seen Yorgos Lanthimos' other movies, including The Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer. They've been on my list for quite a while, and I was also, probably should admit, that The Favourite I was a bit skeptical of. Period costume dramas, they're always Oscar material. They often are kind of dry and a bit of a slog to get through, in my opinion. Never really been my thing. But I love the cast, and Lanthimos, if nothing else, is known for his surreal quality storytelling and his unique creative choices, so that really had me interested to see what this was going to be like. Watching the film, I was a bit more keen than ever to see his other films, because this is probably his most accessible, so I want to see his other ones because they're obviously a bit more surreal and odd. What really surprised me is how funny the film is, and that's very rare for a Best Picture nowadays. It's vulgar and profane, which is also quite shocking. Brutally honest in its portrayal of its characters, and it really serves the film very well. I think where the film shines the most is its characters. The plot's fairly straightforward. It's essentially the character piece about 3 women and their attempts to consolidate or wield their power. And there's an almost cartoon quality with them all trying to one-up each other in their quest for more control and influence, which makes it a lot of fun. It's surreal and silly, but it also has a certain bitter quality that makes it feel more real and appropriate for a modern audience. I have to admit, when I saw the film initially, I was a little underwhelmed, but of all the movies that are nominated, this is one stuck with me the most. And I thought about it a lot more, and as I thought more about it, I enjoyed it a lot more. I reflected on this film quite a bit. I can't actually wait to watch it again. I think it's, of all the nominations, I think it's one I'm probably more likely to go back to. As far as the nominations received, it's no shock that the accolades for acting in the film have been lauded. Olivia Colman is sympathetic, hilarious, and at times quite harsh as Queen Anne. Emma Stone manages to have a sweetness to her initially, but has a real maliciousness and conniving to her character as well. Rachel Weisz has a very layered performance. She's slightly pathetic at times, but also very manipulative and nasty. All the women in this film in general are just fantastic, and they play off each other very well. Their performances sort of change depending on their interaction, and over time the dynamics and influence of power change the characters. For a film about female empowerment, it's very timely for its rise in strong feminine figures, but it also shows how power can corrupt, and the effect on a lower power can be damaging to those who come close to it or pursue it. In fact, it's hard to shake the feeling that as the film goes on, our characters descend more and more into misery as they try to get power. The costume production design, I don't really need to highlight this, it's stellar as you would expect. The editing and direction is definitely commendable, especially in some of the stranger sequences in the film. Cinematography is fantastic. There's a real sense of claustrophobia, especially in scenes in the Queen's chamber when the Queen is alone in the bed and things like that. There's a certain claustrophobia and uncomfortable level of as if the power she has is almost suffocating to her. She's trapped in this royal role. And you compare that to the wide shots that are outside and in some of the grander rooms when there's so many people. It's very different. It's very well shot in that regard. As a movie, I feel it will stand the test of time. It's a great antidote to the usual costume dramas, and the performances are strong, and it manages to be entertaining while not losing what makes it stick out. Also nominated this year is Green Book. I saw an article during the week, and it was saying that Green Book and Bohemian Rhapsody are the 2 villains in this era, and I think that's probably accurate, because I think it seems like it's a case of the Emperor is wearing no clothes. It's just, this seems like a film to a throwback era, but we'll talk about that a bit more. So the film has 5 nominations, including Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Editing. This is a film that's come under fire for its use of 2 tropes in particular, and these are the name of the tropes. So, the magical Negro trope and the white saviour trope. I think we should address those. The former is where a character of colour comes to the aid of a helpless or clueless white character, but has very little characterisation themselves, and is there mostly to serve or have a profound influence on the white character. Whereas the latter trope, the white saviour trope, is where a white character, by imbuing the hapless minority character with a profound knowledge or information that no doubt could have never been discovered without his intervention. And this isn't getting political. These are terms that are widely used as far as film criticism goes. So this isn't to trigger anyone. And there are good films that use these tropes even still. Overall, I think it points to lazy screenwriting. And in a film about race, the use of those 2 tropes, I think, is a little unforgivable. Where do we see these in Green Book? Well, as far as the magical Negro trope goes, Don Shirley is played by Mahershala Ali, and he's quite a shallow character. He's not really given much characterization or backstory. He's a talented pianist, but the film only hints at his past, including familial strife and his sexuality. Instead, it focuses more on Tony Vallelongo, played by Viggo Mortensen, how he changes because of interaction with Don Shirley. In fact, the character of Shirley is really, really passive, rarely having moments where we get to explore him as a character. And yeah, we could say the film is about a relationship between the two men, but really it's more about how his character, the character of Tony, is changed by meeting Don. I just think that's a major missed opportunity. A lot of people have pointed it out, and I have to agree, it's quite lazy. Like, the film's called Green Book, which if you're not aware what that is, it was a manual that used to guide African Americans through parts of America, you know, shops or hotels where they would be safer, more welcoming, especially during the Jim Crow laws. And having an African American artist who's possibly uncomfortable with their own culture and identity navigating through the Jim Crow South would be a fascinating story that explores race. But the film doesn't ever really do that. Instead, it focuses more about Tony. And he's given the backstory. He's given the development of the character arc. The movie is about how he overcomes his prejudice, which isn't really that interesting or even seemed like a hard thing for him to do over the context of the film, quite honestly. Then the other trope, the white savior aspect, whereby essentially Tony is telling Don about his own culture and identity, including a scene where he forces him to eat fried chicken. And is that not troubling? Is it even more racist to have a white character forcing stereotypes of racial identity onto a character? While the film does briefly address that, it doesn't really do it in a satisfying way, and it seems to a certain degree, opine for a time where people could just be stereotypes, which is a little weird. And I don't want to get bogged down in these issues. This isn't meant to be a political podcast or anything. It's just when studying film criticism, it seems like that's definitely something, and it feels like in a better film more worthy of a Best Picture nominee, these wouldn't arise. I just feel like the film is a bit lazy. There's not really any nuance to the writing with regards to its commentary on race. A film that's basically about two characters, but only one, possibly the more interesting one, is less developed. Which is why it's shocking, in my opinion, that it has the best original screenplay. Not. It's the problem with it is that it's the laziness of the film. It's really predictable, really repetitive. You can see exactly how the film is going to play out from the first 20 minutes. It really seems like scenes are just almost on repeat at times. There's a few surprises that are never really examined. Of course, there's a revelation about the Don Shirley character, but that's never really given much thing. It's instead used to see how Tony has changed to a certain degree. And I should probably talk about the film rather than just bashing the script to a certain degree. I think tone of the film is light and fluffy, which I actually think is a bit of a pleasant surprise overall. Once the film becomes clear it's not going to examine race profoundly or interestingly, the tone of the humour in some situations was a bit more welcome. At the very least, it's not one of those Oscar films that dissolves into forced misery, and the film is definitely saved and is hinged on the chemistry between Ali and Mortensen. They play really well off each other, and there's a genuinely entertaining moments. I do think the film looks quite good. It's not groundbreaking, obviously, but has a real warmth to its colour palette, and it's pleasant to look at. The tone and look don't really help with some of the more serious scenes, but as mentioned, I think the film has plenty of problems in that department already. It's a bit of a crowd pleaser, more so than a lot of the Oscar films in general. And while it's quite shallow, I did find myself mindlessly enjoying it. The film has a certain charm and warmth. It's not offensively bad or even really good, but it's mostly fine. I'm indifferent and unsurprised it got nominated because it checks the boxes the Academy normally likes, even though I don't think the film is fantastic or anything. As far as the nominated performances, Ali is good in his reserved portrayal of Shirley. In fact, he may be the most worthy of the award in my opinion. I think the category is a bit weaker this year, but he probably is the most deserving, at least in my opinion. Mortensen's performance has also got a nod, and he's a good actor, and it's a fine performance. It's a bit over the top for my liking. Seems like a sort of stereotypical Italian-American impression. Not a lot of depth to it. I do think in a more difficult year he probably wouldn't have got nominated. I would have personally preferred to see Ethan Hawke here for first performance. That's just opinion, and all that stuff is subjective. So, in closing, I don't think the film has a lot of depth. It's quite lazy in its craft, and I don't know if it should have been nominated. I see the film's charm, but I don't think it's anything special. It's definitely not worthy of a Best Picture nod, in my opinion. So a few of the films named there, we've named 5 films so far, including Black Panther, Bohemian Rhapsody and Green Book. A lot of people are pointing to those as an example of the Oscars trying to be a bit more mainstream and relatable, because those are, well, obviously some of them are blockbusters, the two aside from Green Book here, and it just seems like they're more enjoyable, more accessible films than are usually nominated, and that's not a bad thing. I just feel like the quality of those films isn't worthy of a Best Picture nominee, and the rumour was at one point that the reason they wanted to introduce Best Popular Film was so they could nominate Black Panther outside of Best Picture. So there we go. Then we come to our 6th nominee, and this is probably the least accessible one in my opinion. And that is actually tied for the most nominations along with The Favourite. It's got 10 nominations. Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay, Best Foreign Language, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, Best Sound Editing, and Best Sound Mixing. I'm of course talking about Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's new film. As you can guess, I'm a bit cynical of Oscars in general. And with that in mind, on paper I probably should have hated this film. It just seemed like traditional Oscar bait. Black and white foreign language period film, directed by an Academy darling. And I do like Cuarón's some of his other films, especially Children of Men. And the fact that this film was on Netflix made it a lot easier to see. So if you do want to see it, you can just watch it on Netflix, no problem. It's put out by Netflix. So like with a lot of these films, it kept my preconceptions at the door and I watched it. And I have to admit, I actually kind of loved the movie. I really did. And yeah, it has a few faults, which we'll talk about in a minute. But overall, it's a simple and powerful bit of filmmaking. It's very effective. It's got an emotional and relatable resonance, and even has moments of violence and conflict that are quite shocking in the context of the film. What I find interesting is that in a time when so many films are pushed for their strong female representation and voice, that this movie's being a little bit overlooked. Which is surprising, because this film is really about the women who raise us. Cuarón pulls from his childhood, growing up in Mexico and his mother. It's clearly a very personal film for him, but he doesn't lose his audience in doing that, like some personal projects have in the past. I don't know how much I can say about the film. It really speaks for itself, and the awards it's nominated for are well deserved. I will say if the film has some flaws, you could say it's a little slow, perhaps a little bit long, and emotionally manipulative. Then again, those are just nitpicks. It wouldn't take away from the film as a whole for me. Slow pace is actually probably due to the smaller personal nature of the film, and the scenes that are emotional work as part of a larger story, especially coming into the ending. So looking at our nominations, the directing, it's definitely deserving in my opinion for that. The film is gorgeous looking, it's really well put together, a lot of visual symmetry throughout. It's a film that has sort of layers in general. In the acting categories, our lead, who plays Cleo, Yalitza Aparicio, there we go. I can remember her first name, not her surname. She's a revelation, and I mean that in the strictest definition of the word. She has no experience with acting, and she gave such an emotionally charged and natural performance that was outstanding. It really feels real. Like, if you didn't know any better, you could almost think that this was a documentary and she was a subject of it. It's fantastic in that regard. Another person nominated for her performance is Marina de Tavira, which was a surprise for a lot of people. Not that her performance wasn't good, it just, I don't think people expected her to get the nomination, but she absolutely deserves it. Her character is a lot different than what you would expect. She has real strength as a mother, without it feeling forced. The screenplay is very well written. You can tell the film is very personal for him, and he draws on it a lot, drawing from his childhood and his upbringing. And I do think, yeah, it deserves a nod there, because it's a very emotional, well-written script. I find it a little odd the film is nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, if only because it's also nominated for Best Picture, which makes, presumably, the Best Foreign Language Picture a bit redundant, because if none of the other foreign language films are deserving a Best Picture nomination, then surely it's just going to go to Roma. Then again, I think that's just more of an issue with the conventions of the Oscars as opposed to anything else. The cinematography that got nominated for, it's beautiful, especially with the black and white. It just looks gorgeous, especially in the wide shots of Mexico. And the cinematography also does a great job of showing off the production design that the film got nominated for. The sound mixing and editing are quite subtle in this film, in the scenes where there's protesters and at the beach towards the end. I think you could definitely see why it got nominated, or more specifically here, I guess, why it got nominated. It's definitely worthy of a Best Picture nomination. No doubt be a film that I think will be held in the highest regards as far as foreign language films for years to come. I do wonder if it being a Netflix film might affect it. I suppose the fact that it got so many nominations indicates maybe not. But you could possibly see some more traditional people in the Academy going against it because of the way it's distributed. I don't know. Anyway, I would say one of the stronger nominations this year, certainly. But we have 2 nominees left. First, we're going to start with A Star Is Born, which has got 8 nominations this year, including Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Sound Mixing, and Original Song. So, as you can imagine, I railed a bit against music biopics earlier. How do I feel about one that isn't actually based on a real story, but still follows a lot of those conventions? In fact, I'll say this is probably even less original than some of those, because this is the 4th remake of The Star Is Born. But despite all that being, it's quite predictable, I found the film to be great. I know that seems a little unfair, especially considering I attacked other films for being a little predictable, but the truth is, at least initially, the film is not as formulaic as you might expect. I only think that in the latter half, with Ali, Lady Gaga's character, becoming famous, that it gets a little bit predictable. I enjoy the first part of the film much more for that reason. What I do like is that, unlike most other music biopics, the rise to fame, it's not really just this rise to success. It's more of a story of one character's rise and another's fall, and how they kind of pass each other on that journey as one rises and one falls. More so than that, it's a story about how the trappings of fame can ruin your life. The love story is incredibly well done. Gaga and Cooper just have a fantastic chemistry, and it makes the problems they encounter really impactful, and the ending more emotional and sad as a result. It's one of those films that I think is competently made and successful, but there's only so much you can say about it because of that. Let's look at the nominations, maybe we'll get a bit more out of that. So, Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, I think that's incredibly well deserved. He definitely deserves it. His direction was fantastic, which didn't get a nod, which probably statistically indicates it won't win for Best Picture. Normally, a film that isn't nominated for Best Director doesn't get nominated. I think it's only happened maybe twice. Yeah, it's definitely happened for Driving Miss Daisy, and it happened for Ergo. It may have happened a few other times, but it's very rare. So, unlikely to win Best Picture, but I do think he has a fantastic performance as Best Actor. I think he's got a really good future as a director in general, because I think this is showing off that he's really multi-talented. As far as his performance goes, though, he's charming, and as the film goes on, a bit more frustrating as a character. He gives a very good emotional performance, and the character of Jackson is made very sympathetic by that. He's definitely, like, some people kind of chalk him up as this kind of pretty boy actor, but he's given some fantastic performances over the years, and he's very good in this, especially. Probably the best performance he's ever given, in my opinion. Then as far as supporting actors, we have a nod for Sam Elliott. I love Sam Elliott. His acting is great in this, but I don't know if it was worthy of a nomination. He does have some great scenes with Cooper, but I just feel like if the category... the category is a bit weaker this year, in my opinion. I think it is a good performance. A bit emotional, especially with scenes with his brother. Overall, I think that maybe if this was a different year, it wouldn't have got nominated. Lady Gaga is nominated, which has been well documented at this point. She's very fantastic in this as far as her acting and performing. Again, I wonder if this role had gone to someone we think of as an actress, would there be as much credit given to the performance? And maybe it's just because it's getting a nomination because people didn't expect Gaga to be such a fantastic actor. Obviously, she'd acted a little bit before, but this is kind of her biggest role yet. I do think it deserves a nomination. I'm not trying to take away from it. I just wonder if people have exaggerated how great she is because of that factor. I think if nothing else, I can't really think of anyone else who would belong in that category. I can think of maybe one person. I think Elsie Fisher from 8th Grade was fantastic this year, but she's quite young, so maybe that there's always a bit of a stigma with, I think nominating such a young actress. As far as adapted screenplay, I don't know. I think the film is fine. It's a bit predictable. I think the film's message of have something to say as an artist, when I think that the film is a bit hypocritical in that department. I don't know if this film does have a lot to say. I don't think it's a particularly strong screenplay. So, cinematography, again, it was fine. I don't think it deserves a nomination. There's a lot of better options. The sound mixing for the film is fantastic, well deserved in that, and obviously Shallows is getting a lot of radio play, a lot of success. It's a breakout hit, independent of the film itself. That's probably going to win. I think it just seems like a lock. I think the only competition it might have is from All the Stars from the Black Panther soundtrack, but I think it's more likely to win, and it's probably well deserved. It's quite a good song, to be fair. So I think as much as the film has a lot of flaws and how predictable it can be, I didn't mind because it is well done. You get sucked into the relationship between these two characters and the story. It's well executed on an emotional level, especially the ending. I'm not saying it's like one of the best films of the year, but I enjoy the movie enough that it doesn't bother me that much that the film's nominated for Best Picture. I think there's worse offenders that shouldn't be nominated here. I do think some of the nominations are a bit of a stretch, but I think that the Best Picture nominee doesn't bother me too much. Well, our last of nominees, very divisive film, Vice, which has 8 nominations, including Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, Best Makeup, and Hairstyling. Okay, what the hell happened with this film? This is such a weird experience. It's not like what anyone expected from this movie. Adam McKay's Vice is meant to be a biopic of Dick Cheney. I think Dick Cheney is a bit of a mysterious figure, and the film actually acknowledges that, but it never really sheds any light on him. Kind of embraces a certain mythical, mysterious quality of him. Shows him in a harsh light and a sympathetic one. It's played for comedy, it's played for drama. The film is meta, the film has traditional narrative. So yeah, you can kind of start to see the problems here. It's a film that really as a whole doesn't know how to approach the subject. So it tries to do a little bit of everything, and it kind of falls on most counts in that. I just don't think it's successful. The film starts pretty normal. We get an insight into Cheney as a kind of young man. The film goes on, really it doesn't know what to make of him. While most people's opinion is that the former vice president was incredibly powerful, more so than any other vice president, and a lot of people say him as an evil man, the film doesn't really commit to anything about it, about the character. It presents him as a human when it feels like it needs to. Other times, though, it basically blames everything on him, including the political and modern terrorism landscape. And while he may be a factor in some of that, I think the film is reaching a little bit. Throwing Cheney in the same group as Trump is a bit too simple an explanation. The truth is, if the film doesn't tend to explain or examine the character much at all, it feels like McKay lets his political opinions cloud the story at times. It's too easy to just say, oh, he's a Republican. And I say that as someone who doesn't have any real bearing or interest in American politics as far as left or right. And those factors, coupled with the sort of weird gonzo style of filmmaking, it's like there's a fake credit scene, or that which got a laugh out of me, but it's very odd. There's soliloquies from characters, fourth wall breaking, and real life footage is thrown in as well. It's a real kind of punk rock film in that regard. Feels like a lot of this is just a cover for how vapid the film really is. I don't feel particularly strongly one way or another for the movie. I do commend it for its style. It certainly kept me invested with weird creative decisions. I found that interesting, if nothing else. It just feels like it's a case of all flash and no substance. I would say there were moments I genuinely laughed, but that seems quite odd in a film about Dick Cheney. I'm not making the film, I'm not marking it down for being different than I expected, but I do think a good biopic should give us some insight into the subject, and I don't think Vice did that. While I can certainly applaud how interesting and unique the storytelling approach is, I don't think that the story is told incredibly well or executed very well. As for nominations, I don't think McKay deserves a Best Director now, I think. With lots of historical biopics, the Academy just laps it up. I don't think the director's vision works really well. Just feel like there was an attempt made, but it wasn't well executed. And I appreciate him trying something different, I just don't think it worked incredibly well, or at least not for me. The film really belongs to Christian Bale, so it's no shock that he's nominated for Best Actor. He's, put aside the weight gain and the hair and makeup and all that, he's really picked up on Cheney's mannerisms and performance. It's outstanding. He disappears into this role. You really forget you're watching an actor and not the real thing. And that's something I was saying earlier. In a really great performance, you forget about the actor. You just see the character, and that's especially hard when you're playing a real life person, and Christian Bale absolutely nailed it. I think he absolutely deserves to win the Best Actor nod this year. On the other hand, though, I feel like the other performances are maybe a bit cartoony or a bit over the top. Feels like some of the actors are just playing dress up on Saturday Night Live or something. Rockwell, I like Rockwell. I think his nomination is undeserved, though. He's fine in the role. I just think the film itself demands he kind of hams it up. It doesn't really feel genuine. It just seems like Sam Rockwell with a bit of an accent as opposed to George W. Bush. With Amy Adams, this is another instance where I think they just voted for a name they recognise. I think she's done better work. It wasn't that it was a bad performance. It's just, I don't think it was particularly groundbreaking or worthy of a nomination, really. As far as Best Original Screenplay, I don't think that's necessary at all. I've gone into my troubles with that, about how kind of widely different the screenplay is, how it diverges all over the place and it's quite inconsistent tonally. I don't think it deserves a screenplay nod at all. It's just a real scattershot movie. Anyway, the editing nomination it also got, I found the editing in this one to be brash and obnoxious, really grating, to be honest. It has a punk vibe, as I kind of said, but I don't feel it suits the movie. I found the editing to just be blatant and really annoying. Makeup and hairstyling is definitely impressive. I think that's worthy of a nod. Overall, the film is divisive, as I guess a film like about Cheney would be. And I feel like, personally, I was on the side that found the film to be a bit impotent and overbearing. I feel like the style of the movie deserves marks for at least trying to be something unique. I always looked tipped for Oscar nominations just because it was a historical biopic, but I don't think it's fully deserving for most of the nominations it got. Definitely not Best Picture, in my opinion. So that's what I think about the film in general. Overall, I've been saying this for a while, I think it's a lesser year for Best Picture. I think there's some pretty noteworthy films that were left out around this year. So I'm going to rank these. I'll start with number 8 because we have 8 nominees this year. At the very bottom, Bohemian Rhapsody. As I said, formulaic, quite boring. Has a few redeeming qualities. Rami Malek is quite decent. The sound is quite good. I don't understand why you would mix this film up so much chronologically in service of a worse story. And it's quite boring, in my opinion. As much as it was a crowd pleaser, I didn't love it. Coming at number 7, we had Vice. I just went into my thoughts on that. Aside from a Christian Bale performance, it's a very odd film. I don't think it really got to the heart of Dick Cheney, if you'll pardon the pun. It just really, I didn't feel that invested in the film. I thought it was interesting. I didn't think it was good. not worthy of a nomination at all, in my opinion. Coming in at number 6, we have Green Book. As I said, this film, as far as the writing especially goes, is almost amateurish. It really feels like a film that harkens back to an old era. And while there is a certain charm to it, I don't think it's particularly good. I feel like it was repetitive, somewhat boring. Overall, definitely not worthy of a Best Picture nominee. Black Panther coming in at 5th, middle of the pack. You know, not one of my favourite superhero films, not one of my favourite Marvel movies. I feel like it falls apart a bit in the last act. I understand its cultural significance. I do think it has quite a bit of flaws. I don't think it's worthy of a Best Picture nominee. In fact, I probably, if they did put a Best Popular Film, I'm sure they just wanted to give the award to this. It is quite a good movie. I just don't think it's Best Picture material. Coming in at number 4, I would say, yeah, some of these, maybe 4 and 3 here could be, I could swap those out possibly. I feel like they're both quite close. Black Klansman, Spike Lee's film. I thought it was good. I thought it was an entertaining biopic about an African American man that infiltrates the KKK. Performances were good. I think it definitely had a certain modern commentary to it, effortlessly. I do think it was a bit heavy-handed at the end, trying to tie it in. I don't think that was entirely necessary. It feels like it kind of clashed with the rest of the film. But it is a good movie. It's more entertaining than a lot of the Best Picture nominees historically. And I think that's actually probably a quality that's more evident in these Best Pictures this year in general. It's definitely a more watchable year as far as Best Pictures, because some of these are just a bit more mainstream, a bit less artsy perhaps. Anyway, coming up with number 3, a film that a lot of people watched regardless, was A Star Is Born. And as I said, it's nothing original, but it's very well done. I did like the chemistry and the relationship between these two characters. I thought there was quite a good emotional quality to it. Overall, very successful, very well executed film. Nothing groundbreaking, but an entertaining watch. And it's probably one that a lot of people have already seen. Probably one I wouldn't be opposed to watching this again. Don't think it's amazing or anything. I just think it's a well-made film for what it is. Coming in at our top 2, so I would say these top 2 are quite a bit ahead, in my opinion, of the other nominees. I think there's quite a big gap there. And again, I also think these two films could possibly be swapped around. Coming in at number 2, we have The Favourite, Yorgos Lanthimos' new film. Yeah, it's so odd to have a film that's a period drama. It's traditional Oscar bait, and it's vulgar and funny and surreal. Yeah, this is a film that just, I enjoyed that out of it. I've thought about it a lot. I want to see it again. It's just, I can't say that about a lot of these movies, but it's a really entertaining, odd film. And it's not just picking something that's a bit stranger. I think it's well done. It's funny, it's vulgar. The characters are fantastic. The performances are amazing. Yeah, I really enjoyed The Favourite, and I enjoyed even more looking back on it, which I think is something you can't really say about a lot of the films nominated. Sometimes you see these films and you think they're fine, then the more you think about it, they fall apart a bit more. I think The Favourite has actually gone up in my estimation, which is rare. Coming at the top, we have Roma. Again, a film I thought I would not like. A film that seemed like it was trying too hard. It had such an emotional connection. It felt like real prestige filmmaking, a very personal film. The performances are fantastic. It looked gorgeous, and it just had a real genuine feel to it. On an emotional level, it just felt like a film a lot of people could relate to. I thought it was really, really good. And it's funny, I'm realizing now my number 1 and number 2 are actually the films that are most nominated. They're tied for most nominations this year, so maybe the Academy did get something right. And as much as we can say the Oscars are changing, and they certainly are, the Academy is made up of people of all different, genders and creeds and all that sort of thing, and race. So it's hard to say, oh, they're changing, because it's not one hive mind. It's all these different artists. And I do think overall, might be a weaker year for Best Picture, but there is some good movies there. That's my ranking. Those are my thoughts. I'm sure plenty of people think quite differently. So let me know, because that is our show this week. If you think I'm wrong about Roma, if you think I'm wrong about Bohemian Rhapsody, or anything in between, let me know. You can email the show at popcultpod@gmail.com. Reach out on Instagram, popcultpod, all one word. Twitter, I'm at pop_cult_pod. That's how you can get in touch with the show. I'll be putting up some stuff on YouTube, possibly on Frozen, possibly on films I feel should have been nominated this year. The noteworthy snubs, I should say. Wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever, please give us a like, a share. A positive review would be fantastic as well if you're on iTunes. That would really help. Next week we're looking at Marvel movies. I'm going to be doing a phase of Marvel movies once a month in the lead up to Endgame. So of course there's going to be phase 1, which is Iron Man up to the Avengers. So keep an ear out for that. Other than that, I should probably thank my sound guy. I've completely forgotten to thank him every week. Tom, our sound guy, is doing a great job, really making me a bit more clear, because I'm totally out of my depth here. If you could maybe get rid of there's like a beeping at the end of some episodes. I don't know what that's about. If you can maybe try to sort that out, that'd be appreciated. But thanks, you're doing great.